Welcome to Season 4 of the Biz Show, sponsored by InvestQuire. Discover what's next with this insightful podcast. And now, your hosts, Barry and Lisa.
Lisa, how you doing?
Hi, Barry. I'm doing good. How are you?
I tell you all the time, Barry is a disease. It's like scurvy. I guess I'm a disease. I'm going to infect you.
Yes, sometimes you are a disease.
Thanks. I don't know if to take that as a compliment or an insult.
You are very infectious. Take
it as it is, yes. I just try to live life.
Yeah.
Well, everybody, welcome to the Biz Show.
Welcome back, everyone. We're trying to get those listeners to subscribe. I feel like I've talked to so many people that say, oh, I listened to your podcast. And then I ask them, have you subscribed?
I know. So listen, hey, we gained a few extra subscribers. We got 13 now.
13 more in the world.
Ooh, a whole 13 subscribers and about 400 listeners.
Well, I'm meeting with a marketing rep on Monday to talk to her about how to expand the marketing on our podcast and also help out with some back-end operation systems, because even though we do that for others, sometimes we're the last ones to do it for ourselves.
Yeah, it is. We do it for others, and sometimes we're so busy to do it for them, we don't have enough time to do it for ourselves. I get it. Well, listen, this episode, Lisa, we're on episode 16 of season 4. Can you believe that? We're chugging right along. So this episode is about burn rate, right? And we've talked about burn rate many times, and almost in every season we've mentioned in some podcasts about a burn rate. Today we're actually going to talk specifically about a burn rate, what it is, how you may or may not be using it to your advantage or disadvantage, whatever the case might be, right? But really we want you to understand what burn rate is, and probably you don't think it is what you think it is.
And how to calculate it correctly. So yeah, we're going to
Yes.
Topic more on a deeper level.
The better you understand it, the better you can use it to your advantage, right? So, there are good burn rates and there's bad rate. There's really two, a good burn rate and a bad rate. We'll talk about those in a minute, right? But most founders, they think they know what the burn rate is, and they think it's a number. And that's only part of the answer, right? It's not just a number, right? What's that?
It's not all of it, right? It doesn't.
No, it's not. Burn rate isn't how much cash you spend. It's about how long you survive and how you use that cash, right? So, and investors are going to look at that, right? When it comes time for buyers or investors, they want to look at your burn rate, and they're going to analyze that burn rate.
Yeah, and part of it is us drilling into the fact that you have to know your numbers, right? You have to know what revenue is coming in. You have to know your expenses. And so all of those things will determine your burn rate, right? That kind of leads into that final answer for the investor to take a look at that and see how you are operating, what your discipline is with spending, how much more money you have available to you, and will it cover the overall growth that you have, that you're anticipating or that you're planning to do over the next year or 2 or 3. So it's not just a number, it's a strategy. It's about how well you do with your budgeting. It's about where you're spending your money. And it's about, is it in balance? Is it being allocated correctly to justify, what revenue that you're receiving?
Yeah, exactly. And you're spot on, Lisa. Burn rate is really a strategy, right? And it's a telltale sign of how you manage your business, right? If you've got a huge, big burn rate and not a lot of cash, you're not managing it effectively. And then, of course, the other way around.
Sooner than later.
Yeah, exactly. So let's define it, right? So I mentioned earlier, right? So in the simplest forms, yes, burn rate is the amount of cash that you're spending in a given amount of time, specifically every month. And you're going to have a burn rate for January, February, March, and then the quarter, or so on and so forth. Just like it's a financial. But it's over.
Right? There's 2 types.
There are 2 types, right? There's a gross burn rate, and then there's a negative burn rate. So the gross burn rate is what most everybody thinks burn rate is, right? And that's basically your cash, your cash that you're flowing out, right? So how much money are you spending? That includes your payroll, your rent, your marketing, all other expenses, right? And then all that comes to $10,000 a month, $25,000 a month. That becomes your burn rate. But that's not your burn rate, right? That's the gross burn rate, just like in finance, right? There's a net, and that net then you're going to also add in your revenue. So you whatever your burn rate is, you're going to take your revenue, you're going to blow that out. Then you're going to have that delta, right? And then that's your burn rate right there, right? So your net burn is basically going to be your monthly expenses, and then you're going to minus out your revenue.
And truly, like, I mean, even on the day to day, looking at my own expenses and my own income coming in, that really, really does matter. And the net really matters more than the gross because you all are going to incur expenses. And you need to know, like Barry said, what your runway is. How long will that money stretch you or last you until the next flow of revenue is received, right? Because
Yep.
sometimes in companies, you have 30-day, 60-day, 90-day invoicing. And so you really need to know that runway so that your business will float and you are able to carry it and sustain the monthly and the daily expenses moving forward. So that's why the net is way more important than the gross, because you are obviously operating with a lot of overhead possibly and expenses and maybe payroll and also taxes. So when I take on a new client, I look at the amount of hours I'm going to invest with them, the amount of people I need to hire to get the job done, the amount of marketing costs. And I take all of those figures into account to determine, is this job and project going to be worth it? Is it going to be, if I'm not going to make enough money on the project, then I don't have enough runway to even take that project on. So you really need to look at your clients and your jobs and your projects in totality and taking into account all of those expenses so that you know what your net is and you know that it's going to be a successful amount of profitability for you to take that on. So yeah, so really, the runway definition, Barry, is like how long your company can operate before running out of cash, which
Yep.
is why it's called your runway. So the
I'm a
formula,
pilot, so I know exactly what a runway is.
I always think of like airplanes, like how much can you stretch the dollar?
Yes.
So the runway is really cash on hand divided by your net burn, and that equals your runway. So know your numbers, guys. That's what we're all here to remind you is know your numbers
Know
and make
your
sure that you
numbers.
keep an eye on it. Like every quarter, every month, you should be checking in to make sure that your numbers aren't changing or you didn't incur extra expenses or you didn't have a loss with one of your projects or clients because losses do happen.
Well, absolutely. Well, let's talk about so most founders get burn rate wrong, and I mentioned this above, right? Because they're only looking at the gross burn rate, right? So they say we spend $100,000 a month, but they ignore that they have revenue coming in, and maybe they got $80,000 a month coming in. So then, really, the net of that is their burn rate's $20,000, right? It's pretty simple
Mhm.
math, but a lot of them don't see that and understand that. So
Right.
net burn rate is the one that matters most to investors and to buyers, right? The second mistake is that they ignore timing of cash flows. And
Mm.
we run into this with several clients, and the fact that not all revenues come in right then and there. Sometimes they're delayed 30 days or whatever the case might be, right?
That is fortunate, but yes, very true.
It is. So some of them have upfront costs that come in. Some of them get paid on a net 30, a net 60. That's all revenue coming in. And then there are the companies in accounting wise that they realize that the income as soon as it's signed, right? The deal is signed. Even though they're not going to get paid for 30, 60 days down the line, they still, realize that on their accounting books that very day. I don't like to. I like to rely specifically when the check comes in. It's in my bank account. That's when I realize the fact that it's there.
Yes, exactly.
But nonetheless,
Yeah.
so just in the accounting, how the accounting works, right? Just understand your cash flows when they're coming in and when they're going out and stuff like that, right? So, cash timing does matter in these totals.
Yeah. Yeah, every company has different invoicing periods and whatnot.
Yes.
And then mistake number three is confusing your profitability with cash flow. We may look good on paper. We may look like, wow, we made all this money this year, and it may feel good, but it's not actually producing the cash flow for your company to be sustaining a good amount of revenue and business practices. So make sure that you understand that difference and you don't confuse it, because you could be burning through cash and not having enough cash flow to sustain your health of your company. That has happened to me before, and I'm like, wait, where can I make my adjustments so that my cash flow increases and I still have a great amount of profitability? And so you have to tweak it sometimes, right? You have to tweak your expenses and how you're managing or operating your company. Um, and so that's why we, want you to do those check-ins and, keep track of your budget, and make sure that you have your eyes on it. Even if you have an outside source doing your payroll or your books for you, make sure you are looking that over from time to time, because the cash flow timing actually differs from your accounting method that you may use. So definitely keep your eyes on that. Um, Accounting is like your profit versus loss. So when revenue and expenses are being recognized is really when you're able to see the profitability or the cash flow. And cash flow is when money actually moves in and out of your hands, like in and out of your own bank account. That is like the cash flow. That is what you have your hands on, not the overall big picture of these invoices getting, accounts receivables coming in. So they're not the same. They're essentially very different. And a lot of people don't understand that if you don't have that sort of like bookkeeping background, and in terms of like being able to have an understanding of how that operates in your books, right? And that's where a CPA comes in. And maybe if you have a good one, then they'll be able to properly advise you or alert you if your cash flow is running out. And that is something that you want to avoid. Yeah. So mistake number 4 is not updating the burn regularly. Burn rate is very dynamic, and hiring will change that, obviously. Marketing expenditures will change that and affect that. And obviously your growth is going to change that, because the larger that you're growing or the faster that you're growing, and then you're obviously incurring more expenses as well. So just make sure, like I said, you have a handle on that, and that we always say, to grow steady and consistently, and not, if you are growing very rapidly, then make sure you're checking in on that burn rate so that you're not, burning through cash at the same rate that you're growing. So that could lead to very bad, decisions and results in your company. Let's see, we have another mistake is ignoring your future burn. And founders will often ask you, what is your burn today, instead of what will the burn rate be in 3 to 6 months? And a lot of people don't know that, right? They don't even know how to calculate that, or they never even look at it.
You
And
know,
so that's a
yeah,
mistake.
exactly. So,
Yeah.
I've asked founders and business owners many times. So what's your burn rate? And they say, oh, $20,000 a month. And I'm like, okay, how long is that going to last you?
Yeah.
Is it 3 months, 6 months, a year? And then there's this blank on their face.
White as a ghost. They're
Yeah.
like, oh,
Okay, let's put this in the simplest terms. How much cash on hand do you have right now? And they're like,
yeah,
oh, well, I got $60,000. I said, all right, great. You got a 3 month burn rate, don't you?
that's right. Yeah. Do the
In
math,
its
guys.
simplest form, right? If you're not if you're using the gross but not the net, but with the net they
Oh,
might be able to push it out to 6 or 9 months. But that's why it's
exactly.
good to know the difference between the two.
And if it's not going to carry you those 3 months or whatever, then you're going to have to do something to reduce your overhead or your expenses so that your money does, last through that runway.
Yeah.
So always check-ins. I can't stress that enough.
If it's not going to last, then maybe you should maybe rethink your career and maybe become a muffler repair mechanic or something.
Muffler repair. But
Well,
there's always a gap. I mean, you could be an Uber or Lyft driver too, right? You could do
there's no
DoorDash.
money. There's no money in that.
I know, been there, done that, right?
Yeah.
Uh,
All right. Well,
yeah.
let's talk. So we mentioned at the beginning of the podcast, why does burn rate even matter? And it matters a lot, right? Because what does it impact? Well, it impacts your survival. Because what is that runway? Lisa talked about runway. How long of a runway do you have to run your business before you can't run it anymore? Um,
Yeah.
it's also going to affect, when do you need to start raising capital for your company, right? So, typically you might have cash on hand. We talked about this last week, and you're going to kind of start the business and define the business and define the product and stuff like that, probably on your own money. That might be, 3 months, 6 months. And then at a certain point, you're going to want to, probably raise some capital. So this can help you figure that out. It's also going to tie into the valuation of your company, right? And that is then going to provide you negotiation leverage, right? So if you have a lot of money available and you have a long burn rate, then you're going to have a great negotiation leverage. If you get a burn rate of 60 days, you're in trouble and you
Yeah.
have no leverage at all. As a matter of fact, the investor has all the leverage, not you. So,
Yeah, exactly.
right?
No
Because
question there.
that's what happens if it's too high. You have a very short runway, pressure increases, and you've got to be reactive to things, and that's not good. And investors don't like that.
Yeah, we hate when you have to be reactive. We want you to be able to forecast ahead so that you don't have to make rash decisions. And, sometimes they're not the best decisions at that moment in time. So, yes,
Yep.
definitely not a good position to be in. And we talked about this on our last episode about investors and, when to borrow money and that sort of thing. And so investors are definitely going to look at your burn rate to assess whether you have discipline and how you manage your company, the overall health of your company. If you're doing your job as a leader, in keeping all those numbers in check and being very efficient. And they also look at the scalability. Like if your burn rate is in check, then you'll be able to scale properly. A high burn with no traction obviously is a huge red flag to investors, and they don't want to see that, right? And they're obviously probably not going to lend you money or invest in your company. And so stay away from having that high burn rate with no traction. And also a controlled burn rate with growth is a positive signal. So you're keeping things in check. You're very disciplined. You're able to scale, and your numbers aren't dramatically changing to where you have to be reactive, like what Barry said. So that's very, very stable. And that would really signal investors' interest in your company.
Yes, exactly. So, how do you calculate it properly? The math is simple, right? So basically, you're going to identify all your monthly expenses, right? Your salary, your rent, any subscriptions for software or websites like Canva or QuickBooks, blah 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 blah. Any of your marketing stuff, any debt payments that you have, anything that's an expense that
Yeah.
becomes part of your gross burn rate, right? Next thing you're going
Hmm.
to do, you're going to add up all your revenue, your reoccurring
Yeah.
revenue, your one time revenue. And I sit on the fence, honestly, whether you're going to add in any future revenues that are 30 days, 60 days out. I don't like to do that. I like to know what's in the bank. That's what I have, right?
Yeah.
Because what happens if all of a sudden a customer's late? They don't pay their bill on time. You counted
Yeah.
on that money and now it's not there.
Right. It's better to be conservative, and then everything else is
Yes, and
yeah.
investors are going to like that too. Honestly, right? The fact that you see that, you know that, you recognize that. So and then
Yeah.
basically the math is simple. Again, you're going to take the gross burn rate. You're going to take your revenue. You're going to subtract the revenue from that. That becomes your actual net burn rate.
There you go. Yeah. So, to calculate your runway, you're going to take the cash flow that you have, your cash on hand, and you're going to divide it by the net burn. And that will show you what your runway figure is so that you could do that forecasting and see how long that will take you into the future. And so, you want to model your future scenarios and actually have successful hiring plans and oversee the revenue growth is happening at a very steady pace, and that your cost increases are in check, and so that you're not getting out of whack there, and you're able to have a successful runway, so to speak. Burn is not a static number. It must be modeled forward. So you're always thinking forward motion so that you're not having to close your doors tomorrow because you didn't do those calculations or that forecasting properly. Of course, we want you to be successful. So just make sure that you know your numbers.
Lisa,
Get
you are a forward woman, aren't you?
Oh yeah. I
you
like to
you like to
things in,
fail forward. You want to make sure this goes forward. Everything's
yeah.
forward, and that's a good thing. That's a positive thing. I'm not insinuating anything else, but
Yeah.
just the fact
I
that
love going forward. Yep.
yep,
I got
yep,
to get to that finish line and take on as much challenge that I can and make sure that I am successful with the right results in the end. So yeah, sometimes you need to lean on your resources and be able to it's you can't do it alone. So you need to have a good team in place to be able to effectively um, run your company.
oh well, yeah, of course, right? Because if not, then you're still stuck doing everything. Plus, you got all these other people around doing something you're not even sure what they're doing. Shame on you
Yeah,
for being a terrible leader at that point.
and
So
these number calculations, I mean, maybe that's not your strong suit. So
yeah,
you can definitely hire out us to do some financial analysis for you and help you decipher what these numbers are.
yeah, exactly. Well, let's talk about how you can reduce your burn rate, right? And there's a couple things that you can do, but you need to be cautious. You need to be careful in the fact that you want to prioritize things and expenses that tie into revenue and
Mhm.
generating revenue. Those you want to keep on, right? The things that are not
Making
generating revenue or not kind of helping in a indirect way to that, you might want to look at, pausing those for a moment or bringing them down, the cost down, right? So things that you want to focus on obviously are sales, customer acquisition, and retaining those customers. And things that you want to cut are non-essential spending, right? So,
Mhm.
other things are controlling hiring, right? Hire when you need to hire somebody. Just don't hire somebody because, oh, look, I got enough to pay them, so let's bring them on board. That's great. But what are they going to do? And are they
Yeah,
generating revenue, or did they just create more of a expense for your burn rate?
exactly.
So you want to make sure that you hire for critical roles first, and then you can start backfilling as the need comes, right? Um, don't scale until you're ready to scale. Payroll, we've said this many, many times. For most companies, payroll is probably the biggest hit to the P&L, right? Um,
Yeah.
so a lot of companies, when they need to downsize or kind of scale back, payroll takes a hit. And
Yeah.
I look to make that the last item that I want to do, right? I want to first go through all my expenses and lower all that stuff before I start letting employees go or whatever the case might be. So the
Hmm.
other thing is you can improve your economics, right? How do you do that? Well, you can increase the price. You can reduce the cost. How are you going to do that? You're going to go talk to your vendors and say, hey, look, vendor, you're charging me $10 for this widget. How about for the next 60, 90 days, you charge me $8?
Yeah.
You just got yourself a 20% bump, didn't you? So, there's nothing wrong with picking up the phone and asking. The only thing they could absolutely say is no. But a lot of times they'll work with you because they understand the pressures on the front end. Even though they're the back end, they still understand the front end pressures that come through. It may be temporary. Maybe you can negotiate permanently. That would be awesome.
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of a no-brainer. That's what I think hopefully every business owner has in the top of their mind is just increasing their revenue. And that will help you in those numbers and in your burn rate, right? So you're always wanting to grow and have your numbers increasing, but there is that balance between your expenses increasing as well. But one way to keep your expenses in check, maybe to optimize your operational efficiency, having like processes become automated where you don't have to hire people to do some of the internal operations, eliminate some of the redundancy that maybe you have, too many employees working on the same thing, and maybe it's not necessary to have everyone, doing the same task. And so that becomes redundant. And that could be a way where you cut back on maybe having some employees in place and really like defining people's roles and duties in their job title. Renegotiating vendor contracts. I've done that with a lot of my companies because sometimes you'll see that their prices are starting to go up because they know they're doing X amount of business with them, and then you're like, well, maybe I need to find a new vendor or renegotiate with the current vendor, saying, hey, look, in order to sustain our relationship, we're going to need you to provide us some incentives to stay in contract with you and continue doing business with you. Otherwise, it's kind of like when you take a subscription out for your TV services or Wi-Fi or, Comcast or Cox or whatnot. And they end up increasing your monthly bill, and you're like, oh, maybe I'm just going to go to AT&T, or I'm going to go to another provider or vendor because I'm going to be able to get that new discounted rate, right? So that's where you want to just check in with your vendors, make sure they're not, continually increasing the cost of the goods, and maybe redefine that contract or get a better rate somewhere else, right? That'll help you and your numbers. Shift from fixed to variable costs. So a lot of people have a lot of variation, like I just mentioned, in their costs, and things could start, increasing. So you might want to outsource some of those things where it's appropriate and maybe get a better rate, from outsourcing to like a virtual assistant or what have you. And use some contract-based resources. Sometimes getting in contract with a vendor or a resource could provide you that better rate. So, I mean, look at all of the possibilities in terms of like how to, keep your expenses as minimal as possible. And then extend your runway strategically by spending money slowly. Don't make these huge decisions because one day you woke up and you're like Barry said, I need to hire somebody because I got this big job coming in. Take a look at the whole picture before you make those large decisions. And definitely continue to increase your revenue, like all of your marketing. All of these operations should be geared towards increasing revenue for the company. And raising capital when and if necessary is also another way to extend your runway strategically. So the goal is not to get zero burn; it's to get in controlled, intentional burn over the runway period of time.
Yeah, exactly. And you said something, Lisa, that kind of really resonates, and just to drill in a hair bit more about the fixed versus variable cost, right? So,
Yeah,
and you mentioned specifically, maybe hiring a vendor to do something because, and that's a good thought because the fact is this: if you have an employee do it, well, you've got payroll, you got taxes, you probably have VICA and all the other stuff that you're paying, and then you also might have health care and everything else, right? So those can fluctuate depending on how many hours employees work like that. However, if you hire a third party company to do something, you can have a fixed cost on that, and you know what that cost is, and perhaps you can negotiate it lower than what you're spending to have your employee do that and have your employee focus on something that is generating revenue,
right.
right?
Exactly. Good point.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah.
So there's let's talk about a healthy burn and a dangerous burn, right? Healthy
Yeah.
burns, everybody knows, right? So what's that going to do? It's going to help support growth of your company. It's going to be tied to measurable outcomes, and it's going to align with the strategies of the company. Versus dangerous,
Oh my gosh, dangerous would not be making revenue, right? Would not be
right?
having clear ROI. You don't even know your numbers. That's dangerous. You're driving by assumptions or maybe just flying by the seat of your pants, right? You're disconnected from your whole entire, you know, um, numbers. You're disconnected from your revenue and you're disconnected from all the expenses that you have, and you're not taking a look at that or how to redefine those to make sure those are in check. So burning without results is a huge risk. So we don't want you to be in that position. Um,
Yeah,
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 speaks
definitely.
for
Well, let's give them a couple pro tips, shall we? And I think they can probably already figure these out from the conversation that we had above. But you know, track your burn rate every single month, right? Not quarterly. Um, Again, know your numbers, right? That's important. Know
it.
your numbers, and know what your runway is, right? So if you should know you got 30 days, 3 months, 6 months, whatever it is. You need to know what that is so that you can adjust accordingly. And then model best case and worst case scenarios, right? You should sit there and think about best case scenario. What am I going to make on this? Worst case scenario, what am I going to? Everything should have a best case, worst case scenario.
Yeah.
Those are
And
your
pro
three
tip
tips
number
there.
four,
Uh-huh.
align your spending with milestones. So that would mean like don't spend before you make the revenue, right? That's actually four and five are together. You want to align maybe buying a new piece of equipment with knowing that you have just received a huge, payday from one of your clients, and then you're able to, purchase that huge asset or equipment for your company. So don't scale your expenses ahead of revenue ultimately. And treat cash as gold, like protect it. That's your most critical asset. Don't just let it slip through your fingers. Like treat it like gold, keep it in your hand as long as you possibly can.
Yeah.
And that
Well,
will
hopefully in
extend
an account that has a high interest yield, right?
interest.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, so a couple tips to avoid. Lisa and I always like to give you five pro tips and then five things to avoid,
Yeah.
right? So the first two
Yeah.
is going to be number one is don't confuse burn rate with your total expenses, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because they
Yeah.
could be different. Because the burn rate is yes, it's your gross burn rate, but again, it's not your net. And
Right.
don't ignore your net burn rate, focusing only on the gross. That's
Yeah. And don't forget to model what your future looks like and what your cash needs are going to be. So failing to take a look at that is just keeping your head buried in the sand, and it's going to cause you some issues down the road that you don't want to have to encounter. And then scaling costs before validating the revenue, before receiving the revenue, before knowing whether or not the client's going to pay you on time. Definitely don't incur those costs ahead of schedule. And running out of cash is a bad thing. So do not run out of cash while assuming the growth is going to come in. So people, again, are spending too much before they actually receive the money. And a lot of people get overly excited and tend to do that. So just be patient. Just let your company grow at its own speed. And then you can
or
make those plans.
organic growth is best. Absolutely. Well, listen.
Yes.
So burn rate is not just a number. It's your survival timeline, right? So that runway and everything else, that's how long you can survive.
Yeah. And if you really understand it properly, and hopefully you do after this podcast, then you actually control your business. You control all the decisions, you can control the business success, and you ultimately control the runway. So
Yes.
don't let it control
Yes, exactly. All right, guys. Well, listen, I hope Lisa and I were able to explain burn rate to you guys. We took a
you.
whole podcast just to sit here and talk about burn rate all in itself, right? So thank you so much for tuning in. We appreciate it. You can get a hold of Lisa and me where?
Check us out on the Facebook pages, the Biz Show, or investquire.com. You can find us all over, all of the Pandora, Spotify, iHeartRadio, and also YouTube. Be
Yes.
sure to click that little thumb button and subscribe, please.
Please
Thank you.
subscribe. Yes. Yes.
Yeah,
We hear it
thank you.
all the time from everybody's out there. Please subscribe, but it's the truth. We've
Even your
got,
children, have them open up their phone apps and have them click that little button.
if you can do that now, we'll really appreciate it. And please reach out to us if you got a topic you want to hear, or if you think you know somebody who might be a good guest on our podcast. We would love to talk to you and possibly them. Thank you
That's
guys so
right.
much.
Go make some money.
Bye, guys. Have a good day.
Thank you all for listening to the Biz Show podcast. Subscribe to stay updated and follow Barry and Lisa on Facebook at The Biz Show. Share your comments or suggest business topics that you'd like to hear. Thank you all for listening. Bye.